We generally like to start just giving you a little background about how we came upon this story. In July of 1863, is that right, Dan? 1863?
Mississippi River?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in Vicksburg, the Mississippi River was essentially belonged to the Union forces at that point. And that was kind of the turning of the fracas, as you will. I happened to see a photograph of an old paddle wheeler that was plying its trade up and down the Mississippi River, and I called Dan and I said, I wonder if it'd be interesting if we did something about these boats, these ships, up and down the Mississippi during the Civil War. And we got involved that way. Dan came up with the idea of Andersonville, and the story kind of grew out of that. You want to add anything there, Dan?
Yeah, I think the initial jump came when Gene mentioned the idea of doing this the story with the ships. It reminded me of the Sultana. How many people here are aware of the Sultana tragedy, or okay, some in the South that would be about right. There would be none usually in Ohio North or New York. Yeah. But the Sultana was the greatest maritime disaster in the history of the United States. It involved more deaths than the Titanic, and it involved soldiers that had been released from Andersonville and Cahaba prisons. 1,500 to 1,800 of those soldiers, after going through one of the worst prison experiences you can imagine, in the context of the worst war you can imagine, then got on the ship and went north and had it blow up under them. And I have the feeling we're about to be grabbed here for something. But anyway, that got us kind of interested in the prisons and in the what that would have been like, et cetera. And we honed in then on Andersonville, and that was the next step in the process, I guess.
Yes. You tell that so nicely, too.
Yeah. Thank you. I've had some practice.
We can kind of open it up to some questions if you have any. Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, I wondered if you had read McKinley-Cantor's Andersonville.
No, we did not. If you can't hear the question, the lady asked if we had read Cantor's Andersonville, which we purposely didn't read because we wanted to do our own story. Yes?
Have you traveled around the South much to even get a good feel of the land?
Have we traveled around the South? Yes. We spent a couple of days in Andersonville. It's a national park now, and looks like a golf course. So I was kind of disappointed because I had read all this research about how really terrible it was, and not disappointed, but just kind of stunned that I had this idea in my head that the place didn't really fulfill that. I hope you can hear me. Excuse my voice. I had some bad Coca-Cola last night. Oh no, not that kind of Coke.
It was full of rum.
Which one of you, where did the Thoreau come in? Which one of you have a enjoyment of
Thoreau came in. I was particularly. It struck me when we started working with this period. I just couldn't get over, and Gene couldn't either, that we were dealing with a period that had 600,000 deaths. And 600,000 people, soldiers died in that war. If you look at the situation right now in Iraq, which is terrible for any individual family, but as a nation, it's a little over 4,000 have died, and we have 10 times the number of people that we had then. The equivalent would have been like losing 6 million people, 6 million soldiers in the same time as we've been dealing with Iraq. Thoreau's comments about most men living lives of quiet desperation, and I'm sure he meant most men and women, but then he didn't say that. You know, attracted me, and some other stuff about Thoreau that ends up coming into the book.
Yes, sir.
Growing up in Danville, Illinois, and being around Lincoln and Lincoln memorabilia, did that influence your attitude towards the using side of the
Growing up in Danville, Illinois, that's the little town I'm from in Illinois. Lincoln actually had an office in Danville. Are you from Danville? Huh?
home, and the balcony spoke from on that home, remember that?
Yes, yes. Right. Very nice.
I mean, I know that I'm drawn to that. You went to the University of Illinois also, and we were there in '55 when Sandberg sold his papers, the Prairie Years, the three books he wrote on Lincoln, sold to the University of Illinois.
Yeah.
Experience to go through that hall and see all that memorabilia, and it did affect my attitude about the Civil War, and it made it probably romantic.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if you had the same kind of experience.
I'm not a big Civil War buff, actually. We did a great deal of research on it, and I'm very touched by it and all that. But are there any reenactors here? Do you guys know about reenactors? You know, they do the thing. We've had some. We've had some reenactors, and when you say you're a Civil War buff, they want to get right in your face, and you know. But also, just in passing, I don't know why I do this, but when this biography that people read of me that I went to University of Illinois, I did not. So, just to clear that up. I didn't.
Went to the Marine Corps Graduate School in Camp Lejeune, right?
I went off Broadway, actually, is what I went.
There's a lady back there.
How long did you collaborate together on this book? How long did the whole process take to start to finish?
This book took 2.5 to 3 years, and we've been working together on books for about 12 years, including the other two.
I'm a teacher, and I'm just real curious. What are like the highs and the lows of people working together? I've never had my students do that as writers, but I think it might be an interesting thing to try.
Yeah, the lady asked, what are the highs and lows of writing together? You know, they don't equal out, I can tell you that. Well, actually, they do. We get along pretty good. We don't write together. We don't sit down and write, you know, in the same room. What we do is we meet once or twice a week. We exchange the pages that we've written, critique each other's work, and you know, decide what we're going to how we're going to go on from there. I think it'd be a good project lesson to have kids try to write together. Yeah, be kind of fun.
We should say, let me just add that a little bit to that. When we're working together on these different chapters, it's not just different chapters. We're both taking one of two key protagonists and working from the point of view, working from the third-person viewpoint of that individual. So we're bringing those two, our writing styles when we're moving from chapter to chapter is being accompanied by the fact that you're seeing what we're writing through the eyes of a different individual. And any differences in there, you know, I think it, you know, should be, because you're seeing it from two different minds.
Yes, sir. Here.
If I can be guilty of asking the first question about your magnificent film career.
The gentleman was talking about, what would you say again?
I hope you're gonna like the question. Of all the magnificent characters that you did so well, as far as the character himself, would you choose one that was the most fun to be?
Geez. You know, films are kind of a peculiar animal. You, as an audience, can see a film and say, boy, that looked great, and what great fun they had and all that. And for the actor, it may not have been as much fun as you might have thought. They do their job, that the author took care of them, the director took care of them, the other people in the cast took care of them, but you might not have had such a good time. So when I get that kind of question, I go to obscure kind of films that a lot of people didn't see, you know, like Conversation and Scarecrow. And I guess you have seen it. See, I didn't go to school at all. I can't remember the characters' names, but you know, in the early '70s, was given a lot of opportunity to do some really fun kind of work, and some in the '80s too, with Unforgiven and things. Yes.
I gotta ask again on things, Christopher Reeve and Superman.
Mm-hmm.
How was it to work with such a young man as
Mm-hmm.
he, and to find, you know, and then how it ended?
Yeah, Chris Reeve was a terrific guy. He was pretty much what you see in films, just a really decent, terrific actor, very nice man. Yeah, I miss him. Yeah, it was really bad luck for that guy. Yes, sir.
Do you see this book being made into a movie? And if so, who do you project might play it?
Yeah. Do we see this book being made into a movie? We haven't really thought about it. We try not to think in terms of movies when we're doing this, because we don't want it to look like a movie script. I don't know. I think Tom Hanks or somebody like that in the lead role. I would play Abraham Lincoln, although I'm a little young for it.
Is there somebody back there? How bad was Commander Words in running Andersonville?
Do you all know who
Do you-
Commander Wirtz was?
They probably won't. Essentially, the person he's talking about was prison master, the commandant of the Andersonville prison camp at Camp Sumter, and he became a kind of a center of controversy because at the end of the war, he was executed for essentially because of the treatment of the prisoners at Andersonville, and the question comes up it has come to us before. What do we think of that? Do we think that that was just? And essentially, from our reading and from our research into it, I'd say no. That we have a pretty strong feeling that he was kind of scapegoated at the end of the war. This guy actually did a lot to try to, with whatever bad he did, he also did things like try to put some order into an impossible situation. You know, the whole South was crumbling, the infrastructure, and it was a really nasty, difficult time. They couldn't feed their own soldiers, and they couldn't exchange prisoners. The South couldn't because Grant wouldn't let them. So you had 13,000 men die out of something like 39,000 total, which is a pretty bad record. But some pretty darn bad records in the northern prisons too, and they weren't under that pressure. It looked to me like, and Gene both, that was our feeling is he was kind of scapegoated. Sir?
When you finish your collaboration on this book or any of your prior work, and it's published, do you put it behind you, or do you have reminiscence of, I wish I said this and that through that character, or I wish I explained things in a different way?
The gentleman asked, when we're finished with the book, are we able to put it behind us, or do we want to reminisce? Is it?
Rewriting it in your head to make
Oh, yes, rewriting. I put it behind me. I really, when it's done, it's done. You know, I like the idea of the characters being finished, and I can start imagining new people. We started a contemporary novel about 6 months ago or so, and we got in about 175 pages or so, and then threw it out. We just felt it wasn't as interesting as some of the historical fiction ideas that we had.
Yeah, there's that funny feeling that once you create the characters and you put them out there, and you expect them to start moving by themselves, you know, to start talking to you and telling you what you should have them say next. And these weren't doing it, so we sent them away. You know? Back there.
How much of the characters in the book are in some of the events based on real happenings, or much of it is
The question is how much of it was fiction, how much was nonfiction in the book. The characters themselves that we developed were fiction, you know, entirely. They're not real people. But we tried to have all the events happening around them be as close as they possibly could to the reality, to the nonfiction.
Thank you. I forgot what I was going to say.
Gene, are you listening? What's
This
his
lady
name?
forgot what she was going to say. That was the next one.
First of all, I want you to know that everybody I told that you were coming here, not a one didn't say, "Oh, he's my favorite."
Oh, really? That's very nice.
That's not
Thanks.
what I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you when Nancy was.
Should I repeat that? I don't know.
Yeah.
You wanted to ask me. I'm sorry.
When Nancy was talking, she said that you have a new career and that this writing is just you're passionate about it.
Mhm.
Does that mean you're not going to make any more films?
Yes. That means I'm not going to make any more films.
You better repeat the question.
Oh, yes. The lady asked if I'm going to make any more films. I said no. That's it, kind of. Yeah. Yeah.
Project, oh my gosh.
Little Southern hospitality.
A great deal of money, or
I don't think there's anything that I would want to do that I haven't already done, really. So I feel like I should get out before I am offered these great grandfather roles, you know.
is,
Yes, sir.
we have a cross purposes here. We can,
Okay.
so. How did our people escape? Oh, how did the Southerners escape from Andersonville? Okay, well, these weren't Southerners that escaped from Andersonville.
Just give us a brief premise. Does it include the compatible and slang, or?
No, the most of this story is about this captain who has 23 men with him in Andersonville, getting out and then getting back to get his men out of the prison, and going through a couple of different steps. One of which is trying to do it according to the book and doing it right with the hierarchy, and the other is by using a bunch of real scurrilous mercenary forces, of which, of course, Gene wrote the key character in that.
Very funny. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes.
How are you both doing, by the way?
Oh, we're okay. It's raining out.
Like,
Can you pause for a second so I can go roll up the windows in my car?
Yeah, sure. We're going to stop everything until you get back.
Quick two questions. In your opinion, the research you've done, I said 2 years it took to develop this book.
At least,
a
yeah.
little bit more, yeah.
Is there any one film in either one of your opinions that really has encapsulated the Civil War experience, either by the soldiers' experience or that era in history in general? And second question, in the realm of college basketball, Duke or Carolina?
That's funny.
Well, none of my films were actually used in this, but maybe Gene's were.
Gee, I can't think of a Cold Mountain, I suppose, who's Gone with the Wind. Glory. Glory is a very good film, yeah. Very good. Shenandoah, yes. Yeah, very good. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Was Andersonville the only major prison camp during the Civil War? I mean, and was there a lot of reprisals, you know, after the war?
There was another one in Cahaba in Is it Alabama or Mississippi?
But
Mississippi.
No, it's Alabama, but
Alabama,
in the South, there were several, and in the North, there were several, besides the fact that they were also keeping, and the North also tended to keep them in a lot of the forts, the fort systems, aside from the prison camps. But the prison camps tended to be the worst places because there's no shelter, and, you know, Andersonville was 20 acres, and it was, there was no shelter from the elements, and you had, at the height of it, 30,000 men crammed into the 20 acres. And you know, literally people are going around with maggots falling out of their flesh. This is a bad place. Elmira in New York, a northern prison camp, was darn near as bad. You know, it was there, and there was a number of northern camps that were quite bad.
Yes, ma'am? How did we decide which who wrote which character? Is that the question? Yes.
Have you heard of typecasting? But no, go ahead.
We just kind of came up with it. I don't know. How did we decide that?
Let's see. Gene likes to have really complex, flawed characters, really, and this is, you know, probably reflects a lot in his acting, you know, and I think the character he developed in there, this Marcel Lafarge, which a lot of people really enjoy this character in the book, is that kind of a character. And frankly, I kind of tend toward characters that maybe aren't quite as complex as that, and I spend more time on their particular story arc, and that might be why that particular choice was made. I don't know. We never thought about that question before, really.
Yes, ma'am.
How would you compare like film versus stage? Do you prefer one or the other?
How do I compare film to stage? Yeah. It's very different. I spent my first 20 years as an actor in New York, and so I had a lot of stage background. Film is satisfying in a lot of ways, but there's nothing like being in front of an audience. Yes, sir.
I've had the pleasure of reading the first 6 chapters, and I want to go back to your wife, Betsy. It says here, we still be working on a first novel, or first book about her. I can believe that.
Yeah.
I'll try to write. Well, the question I have for you has to do with the last sentence on page 43.
Wow. That was yours.
The question is, which one of you is going to take credit for this sentence? Because I like the sentence a lot. It says, there were times when more words only shed less light. Who takes credit for that?
43. Well.
That sounds like Dan to me. Yeah.
Let's see.
I wish I could take credit for. I usually take credit for all the good stuff, but yes, sir.
Oh, yeah. It's me.
Why did we choose Santa Fe? Dan works for the National Parks Department as a underwater whatever it is, and I chose it because I had done a film out there and liked the area. A lot of culture there. My wife's a classical pianist, and I try to paint a little bit, and so it's kind of a nice place to live. Probably very much like this, only smaller. Did we answer this gentleman's question about?
Yeah, we did.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I did, to be accurate with that. That's me.
One was you.
Yeah. Sir?
Damn.
Now, this gentleman here. The question was in the terrible conditions in the prison. In this particular case, Andersonville, was it in our opinion it was on purpose, from hatred or from the situational issues. I strongly believe, and I believe Gene does too, that it was situational. They were, you know, I said that you had the South coming apart at that point. You know, it was Sherman was busy burning down most of Georgia, and this prison camp was located there. There was literally was almost impossible to feed the guards at the prisons, most of whom at this time in Andersonville were real old men or real young kids who had never had authority in their lives, and they're trying to take care of 30,000 guys with no supplies, and you can kind of see what the math of that comes out to. It's going to be a travesty, and it was. But we never saw anything that made us think it was an issue of intent.
I'm still curious about your writing process together. Do you get together and flesh out an outline together first and then go off and write? How do you start the process?
The lady asked if we flesh out an outline before we get started. Yes, we do, but we generally throw it out. I mean, we use it as a guide, but we're not slaves to it. You know, we just feel that it gets us started in some way, and I like the idea of not working with an outline myself.
Do you know the ending before you get there?
Well, we did 2 or 3 endings.
Yeah.
Do we know the ending? The gentleman asked. We did several endings for this book. We had a whole chapter on the Sultana at the end of the book, and that's changed. So, I think that's a process. A lot of writers actually work that way. They write the ending so they have some place to go to, which is a good idea, probably. We ought to do that. What do you think?
Yeah, we have an ending, but then it always changes. It's not the ending.
Yes, ma'am.
If one of your characters isn't going the way you want it to go, do you rewrite the character together? Or do you go, oh, it's not working, I'm going to fix it, and then come back together later and say, this worked?
Yeah, we generally stay with a character. Lady asked if one of the characters aren't working, do we rewrite it together? Or do we get help from each other? We do get help from one another. And many times the character will get kind of stuck, and we need to kind of go to an outline for at least a chapter or so. So yes, we do. Should we, would you like to, we could read a little bit if you'd like. Would you bring
Thank you.
It's kind of fun, isn't it?
As you might have gathered fairly early in the book, there's an attempt to make an escape. Nathan Parker is the Nathan referring to here is Nathan Parker, who's one of the chief protagonists, the captain of the Union Army. This is after they're imprisoned. Nathan wished he could control his breathing. He felt the dank earth close in, smothering him as he sought precious air. Red clay muck clogged his ears, caught up under his fingernails, and made for a sharp taste in the back of his throat. Only fear gave him the spark to keep methodically crawling forward in the darkness. Nothing new in that. It seemed fear had been the prime mover in his life for the past 3 years. He was 10 feet underground and 30 feet from where he had entered the tunnel. His men had dug it by hand, using metal scoops fashioned from the service canteens. They learned from old-timers in the prison camp that holding a canteen over an open flame could melt the solder that held the 2 plate-like halves together. When they weren't using any available flame to boil cornmeal mush or pop lice in the seams of their clothes, they used it to make scoops. Nathan could feel dirt being kicked back in his face by the man ahead of him, and he detected the odor of unwashed feet wrapped in rotted leather. It surprised him that he could smell anything after 3 weeks in Andersonville. After living in indescribable filth, being able to notice a stench made it seem his senses had come back alive at the prospect of freedom. Curious, the sorts of things that went through a man's mind when he crawled through a wormhole in the Georgia night, hoping to escape underneath a stockade fence. Andersonville wasn't like a regular prison where captives were locked up in cells and accompanied from place to place by guards. Once men were penned in the overcrowded stockade, they lived under constant threat of being shot by the guards if they strayed over a line that came within several yards of the stockade poles. This thing was called the deadline. 30,000 men were crowded into well under 20 acres with no shelter unless they fashioned some through their own devices. The only relief to the crowding was a daily death count in the camp, a mixed blessing, the irony of which was not lost on the camp's wags. They bet on who might be able to stretch their legs that night because their blanket partner had passed to a happier world. The decision to chance this escape effort so soon after imprisonment was Nathan's. He knew his men wouldn't be surprised. That's what they expected from the man who had led them through so many battles with so few losses. No, it was Nathan who felt amazed. At first, capture had been almost a relief, as a weight of leadership lightened. But scarcely a week had gone by in Andersonville before he had decided that they must escape. He knew that more than a few weeks in this camp and what remained of their strength and discipline could be drained by the ravages of dysentery, scurvy, and gangrene.
Marcel Lafarge, an ex-Confederate soldier, contemplates his future. The rust-colored Yazoo River that had wound its way from the north moved slowly in the afternoon rain, dumping reddish earth into the Mississippi at Vicksburg. Marcel recalled standing on the same bluff overlooking the muddy stream 1 year earlier, after fighting as company commander with Pemberton's Mississippi Regulars for nearly 6 weeks in 1863. Bitter and struggling to hold the city, they finally surrendered to Grant's Grant's overwhelming forces in July. He knelt on the colored earth, contemplating his past few days. The trip from Hattiesburg with the cotton and other items of questionable legality had gone well. Nothing of note having happened except the chance encounter with a certain Nathan Parker. An interesting sort, Marcel thought, brave to a fault and maybe a bit foolhardy and desperate. The man's gauntness was certainly a testament to where he had spent the past few months. Marcel, standing on the weed-bound cliff, searching for answers, knew with certainty there were none.
Before Nathan Parker decided to take matters into his own hand, he tries one last time to see if he can do this legitimately through the Union Army and with the help of Grant. Grant seemed to come to some internal conclusion, and he had a harder look when he went back eye to eye with Nathan. Parker, I respect your looking out for your company, but I've got roughly 1 million men to worry about. I can't afford to be human. I've got to do what's needed. But, sir, it's no excuse for turning your back on soldiers who could be helped without jeopardizing the others. It would not take a large force to free those men, particularly with me involved, who knows it inside out. I could have my commission restored, and Parker, a diversion for the sake of pity would leave me undermanned somewhere else. I'd be saddled with the care of thousands of men needing medical treatment along with repatriation. Nathan held his stare. Realization was dawning on him. That's it, General, isn't it? You aren't concerned about sparing enough men for a raid or having to exchange rebs that you'd have to fight again. Not anymore, you're not. This war is almost over. Grant snorted in a rare display of uncertainty, shrugged his shoulders. Then turned back to him for one last moment. He was less harsh this time. Parker, I'm no fool when it comes to judging men. I know you're a good soldier and not one to give up easily on a mission. You've done your job and you've been released from your duty. Now give me a chance to finish mine. But mark my words, don't do anything to hurt the war effort to save a few men. I won't forgive that, Parker. I mean it.
Confederate troops have caught up with a small band of mercenaries. Marcel watched as the Confederate Lieutenant Browning looked nervously back at the tree line where his troops waited. Lieutenant, Marcel asked, we've reached an impasse. I suggest you release my men. And before he could finish, Browning drove the guidon's steel-pointed tip toward Marcel's startled face. Missing, he then dove headlong into the icy waters. Shots from across the woods whistled past as Thomas and Buckles began running toward the stream. Marcel fired 2 rounds from his Derringer, which at that distance was about as effective as a child's slingshot. And then he scrambled for cover in the cold water. He held his breath and crawled across the rocky bottom of the waist-deep stream bed until he was, he thought, 20 yards downstream from where he had started. Springing from his frozen bath, he dodged the relentless fire from the Confederates and crawled onto the boulder-laden shore, quickly taking cover.
Nathan Parker addressed letters to families that tore him apart. Men dying by the hundreds in battle formation was hard enough to deal with. But these fellows were dying over months, their souls withering away in baby steps in pace with their bodies. For 3 solid hours he sat with his men and wrote, "I am deeply sorry to inform you that your son, it's with great sorrow that I inform you your son, they did it together. Nathan asked for particulars about the personalities of the deceased, maybe a tender story, something personal to include in the missive. In a way it was terrible, in another it helped, not only as men but him. They became animated and cried, but they also came out of themselves just a bit. Some of the heat seemed to be working its way back in the souls of the 5th Michigan Mounted Infantry. Captain Parker was back."
With your permission, I'd like to read something that Dan wrote. He allows me to read this. This is his dedication. To the roughly 600,000 young Americans, North and South, who left their lives along with their blood on the battlefields of our Civil War, and to the hope that our nation can solve future internal disputes with a bit less passion and a mite more patience. Thank you.